You probably realize that I have a really fun time making these videos for you. I have to tell you that you folks inspire me to really kind of make these a little bit different, a little bit extra fun. So I am doing some more scene setting today with the shirt that I have on. Okay? Now, we're going to be talking about lyric poetry. Well, when you think of the Rolling Stones, you can't help but hear some of their lyrics in your head. Okay? And realistically, most of our songs that we listen to are poems that are put to music. So it just seemed like a shirt like this. Oh, and I went to this concert. It's a few years back now, a couple of years ago. And my son came in from California, in fact, to take me to the concert. And it was an incredible experience. Jagger is like Mr. High Energy, cranking all the time. What a great show they put on. And the stadium was filled to the gills. And everybody in the group, they're high. I mean, even Keith Richards, high level activity, the whole thing. It was great. So anyway, so a little more setting for you today, okay, to help you understand a little bit more about lyrics. Okay, so now, I already told you inspire me. I have to tell you, your essays about poems and your comments about each other's essays are terrific. A number of you said that poetry intimidated you before you started, but that once you got into this and started kind of doing things the way that we indicated that maybe you should, by not being afraid of it, first of all, and by reading by the punctuation rather than line by line, you were able to grab onto narrative poetry really well. And the beauty of it was almost everybody was able to come up with a way to personally relate to the poem. Okay. Now, I've been telling you from the beginning that literature only has meaning if it has meaning for you, the reader. Okay. Well, you did that with the poems. Lots and lots of you wrote about Dog's Death and Manners. Those were far and away the two most popular poems that were written about. Okay. And of course, all of us have been taught manners. Many of you are parents, and it's obvious that many of you value manners because you made a point of saying you're teaching manners to your children. Okay. And thank goodness, because we need more and more of that in the world today, And so many of you wrote about Dog's Death because so many of you have had pets and unfortunately lost pets. Or for some of you who haven't lost pets, you had pets and said, I hope I never do. So it was beautiful to see how you were able to make these poems one with you, these stories that were put to poetry, okay? That's great. That's just exactly what we're looking for. Well, lyric poetry really asks you to do the same thing. But it's not telling you a story. It's really delving into the emotions. Lyric poetry is meant to be emotional. Okay? And so as you prepare to read lyric poems, try to separate yourself, and I said this in the lesson online, but try to separate yourself from the rest of the world around you and get to some place where you can read the poems out loud to yourself, okay? Because poems are meant to be heard, not just read, but heard. And even hearing your own voice helps the poem mean more to you, helps it just get into your body a little bit more, okay? So if you can do that, do it. Now, so what is lyric poetry all about? It's really an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to, in a sense, join together with others in emotions. A poet has put certain emotions into words in the form of poetry. And of course, poetry is really words that are put together, words that are like popcorn kernels, words that are ready to explode for us. And that's what happens with emotions. Emotions explode within us. Well, poets frequently choose words which can just explode for us. and it can explode our emotions within us. Okay, so that's why you can read little poems like the ones that you read and write whole essays about them. You wrote things that were a lot longer than the poems were themselves, because those poems, in a sense, exploded like a popcorn kernel. They exploded right within you. Well, that's what happens with lyric poetry, not, where it's trying to explode with emotion. And we all know that, boy, when we can start pouring out our emotions, it can take us so many places and can get so deeply into us and affect us so strongly and move us so strongly. Well, that's what lyric poetry is designed to do, okay? So allow yourself to be freed up. And go at lyric poetry with the idea that I am going to see if this somehow touches me, okay? Again, I encourage you to pretty much read it by the punctuation, because again, by the lines, a lot of times, it's hard to get the meaning, so read it by the punctuation, okay? And again, lyric poetry really, it's a little bit different from narrative, because narrative is designed to so much give us a story, but lyric poetry sometimes gives a story, but it also gets inside us, gets in our emotions. And so allow some poems to get inside you, to touch you, to see how you can personally relate to the poems, okay? Again, nothing to be afraid of, Some of these poems may not do a thing for you, and that's okay. That's why I don't ask you to write about all of them, because I don't think I know anybody that can really relate to every poem. Now, obviously, I'm choosing poems that I feel over the different poems we have here, they may touch you. They may not touch you, but some of them should touch you, because as human beings, there are certain kind of universal experiences, but not all of these are universal experiences. So grab a piece of paper and a pencil, okay? I'll wait just a second as you do that. A piece of paper and a pen. Grab that, and then I'll go through these poems. I'll give you titles. I'll give you pages, okay? And I'll try to tell you just a little bit about each one. Okay, so take a second right now and do that. And stop this as you do, okay? Okay, we're ready to go again. Now, in all honesty, I can't stop this as I'm filming you, because if I stop it, we have to start all over again, But you can hit a stop on yours. You can pause it as it's going while you go and get that stuff. So hopefully you did that. Okay, so poems for this week. Let me tell you titles, pages, and a tiny bit of information about each, okay? Last week I gave you Death of the Turret Ball Gunner, and nobody wrote about it, and I get it. But this is a poem it's on page 574, The Death of the Turret Ball Gunner. And as I explained to you last week, the turret ball is the place on the back of those World War II bombers where a guy was in a glass enclosure and he had a machine gun, and he tried to keep planes from attacking them from behind, but he was very vulnerable. And so in this poem, you really get into emotions to some degree, but you also see the coldness of war, the coldness that war has to have associated with it, even though it's a very emotional kind of thing. Okay? So, you'll see a turret ball gunner who is killed. Obviously, you can tell that from the title. Okay? Another poem that I put in this week, and I'd like you not to write about this one if you wrote about it last week, okay? Because it was in last week's poem too. Richard Cory has a really strong emotional aspect to it, and some of you started bringing that out already. But think about that, if you want to choose this one, think about that as a lyric poem, not necessarily as a narrative poem. Again, a lot of you wrote about it as a narrative poem already. Okay, but if if you didn't write about it before, then you can choose it again to write about it as a lyric poem. Another poem, and it's a pretty well-known one, it's a Robert Frost poem, The Road Not Taken. It's on page 792. Oh, by the way, Richard Cory was on 647. The Road Not Taken is on 792. And I think pretty much everybody can relate to this poem because The Road Not Taken is really about decision making. You know, you've heard this poem before. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. Be one traveler long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps a better claim. Okay, so it's about decision making. You know, which you come to a path in the road, and we all come to splits in the pathway in our life, right? All of you have decided to be in college, okay? You could be doing something else, but you've all decided to be in college. And so you can relate to this poem, you know, because at the end of the poem, Frost tells us, and that has made all the difference. And our decisions do make all the difference. So on 792, The Road Not Taken, okay? Stopping by the woods on a snowy evening on page 800 is another Robert Frost poem. And it isn't just stopping by the woods, but it's stopping by a dark forest. Okay, now we talked about dark forests just a few weeks ago, you know, so that comes into play. And think about, you know, the darkness and contemplation that goes into this poem, because there's some deep contemplation in this poem, and we all do that. And you know, there's strong emotion a lot of times with that kind of thing. Okay. Another Robert Frost poem on page 795 is Mending Wall, okay? And, you know, the last line in this poem is, good fences make good neighbors. You might be able to relate to this poem in the sense of you might have some kind of a relationship with a neighbor that could be great or it could be not so great. But that's kind of what this poem delves into, you know? So it's a very personal poem because, you know, it's like I have great relationships with my neighbors. We've all been here for a while. I know them well, you know, and I'm very fortunate to live in a really nice neighborhood. I mean, to say really good people all around me, you know? So it's really pretty cool. But that was Mending Wall on page 795. And a lot of people have problems with neighbors. I even knew of one neighbor one person who lived in West Seneca who had an argument with his next door neighbor, and this argument went on for a while, and so one of them put a fence up between the two, and the other one put a sign hanging on the fence saying, "This is not my fence." You know, I mean, these were neighbors that had been friends, and wow, did things go astray. So Mending Wall is really a neat poem. Okay, on page 934 is the poem How Do I Love Thee? And if you have ever been touched by love, you should be able to relate emotionally to this poem, okay? And of course, love, well, what is that but an emotion, you know? So a lyric poem about love, yeah, but it's not sappy. It's really a very nice poem, okay? There's a beautiful Edgar Allan Poe poem on page 949. The name of that poem is To Helen, okay? And Helen is Helen of Troy. You know, the Trojan War was fought over Helen of Troy. So Poe is comparing this woman to Helen, her incredible beauty. And again, a war was fought over her. So obviously, Poe thinks very highly of this person that he's writing the poem about. Again, he's not really writing about Helen of Troy, but he's writing about a beautiful woman. And her beauty, in Poe's mind at least, is similar to Helen. And so beauty, obviously, there's an emotional aspect to that. Okay. And then there's a little bit of a fun poem. To Helen was on 949. There's a little bit of a fun poem called Oh, Oh on page 532. It's a neat poem. It gets into a little bit of relationship stuff. And there's, a really fun irony at the end of it too. So that's on 532. We really have a kind of a contrast of worlds in that poem. Okay, so video question for this week: send me the name of a lyric poem that you really like. We all have different poems that we like. You know, everybody does. Even if you don't like poetry at all, you all know some poems. Send me the name of a lyric poem that you like. Okay, have a good week. Questions, you know where to get me. You're doing great.